Hello, listeners. It's Gunter here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number one in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts to listen and follow in 2024. With an average of 50,000 downloads per episode each week from listeners all around the world, our reach is significant and growing. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spiegner Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer at miranda@noirtainment.com. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and in today's episode I want to continue a bit from the last podcast that I did, because I think I want to expand on a particular issue, and that is, leadership styles or frameworks. And I was approached by someone the other day asking me about, describing different types of leadership styles and, also the leadership frameworks that we operate in. On top of that, I had an interesting discussion with a friend of mine who's actually doing a dissertation on the issue of the CEO as a hero. I don't want to go into it too much. I don't want to steal his thunder. But one of the things that I was thinking about, and we had a quick chat about, was that, the concept of the hero is fundamentally a patriarchal construct. And, in many cases, it's not necessarily a bad one or a negative one, but it has some serious drawbacks. So, what I'd like to do in this particular episode is to firstly examine the toxic traits of patriarchal systems. Because, as I keep saying, our society, our culture is completely infused by the patriarchal ideology, and we're still battling this, even though we're trying to make some serious inroads into the issue. And we have established laws and legislations, policies and procedures, but is that getting the traction that we want? For example, in Scandinavian countries, they are very, very strong in creating a legal system that supports equality, gender equality. Ironically, however, in that context, domestic violence statistics have not reduced. They're as bad as they've always been. So let me start off with this. Again, you might go, oh, here we go again. He's getting back on his soapbox. And yes, I am, because the problem keeps happening. It exists, and we're not doing much about it, in my view. So let's understand the underlying principles of patriarchal leadership. So, patriarchal leadership is characterized and operationalized by dominance, hierarchy, acquisition, competition, and combativeness. These traits have deep historical roots, shaping most societies from ancient civilizations to very modern corporate environments, but also the political system. So in ancient societies, men controlled territories, they controlled wealth, and they certainly controlled decision making. Even in a progressive society like ancient Greece, it was only free landowning men who were part of the democratic system. Everybody else was marginalised. So, in that context, this control extended to all areas of life, including family and community structures and religious structures. Hierarchical systems reinforced male dominance. They excluded women and other marginalised groups from power or power sharing. And these characteristics have persisted, especially in government and in corporate settings. And in that context, the modern CEO is, as I said, often seen as a hero, a concept influenced by Jungian psychology. That archetype, if I'm taking it from a Jungian perspective, emphasizes individualism, control, and competition. Those traits that mirror patriarchal values. So, in some respects, one could argue that it's not all bad, and I agree. However, where it begins to become toxic is when it focuses essentially on competition and acquisition, which ultimately leads to significant social and economic disparities, especially when we've got a system that's based on neoliberal policies, which emphasise free markets and deregulation. And again, this emerges from patriarchal values. Neoliberalism doesn't float on into our consciousness on its own. It has a connection to the original way in which we perceive that society should be run. You know, especially when we talk about hierarchies and, you know, that competitiveness is natural and territoriality is natural to human beings. Not entirely so. And in another episode of this podcast, I might go into that more deeply, but let me stay on point here. You've heard me often give neoliberalism a hard time. And part of it is because it's really exacerbated economic inequalities. It has created vast wealth disparities and weakened social cohesion by prioritising individual success and supposedly market efficiencies. Except what we often forget is that we're presented with one type of market dynamics, capitalism, but there is another level, there is another game afoot, which has got absolutely nothing to do, really, in a sense, with capitalism. But as Yanis Yiannopoulos puts it, it's about techno-feudalism. And that is a book that I recommend everybody to pick up and read, because in that context, you can see that the playing field is fundamentally completely unequal and not level at all. So the idea in this is that, you know, we continue to have a relentless pursuit of profit. Now, that's true to a point, and that has led to things like environmental degradation and particularly the focus on short-term gains are fundamentally prioritised over long-term sustainability. Now, this individualistic approach results in social fragmentation. In this context, communities weaken and people ultimately begin to feel isolated. Now, a reaction to that is people begin to form tribes. Whether they're good, bad, or indifferent isn't the point here, but we become more tribal in that context to get a sense of belonging, even when it's unhealthy, like, for example, the Nazi Party. So there is the need for a cultural narrative that challenges this. So, and in the current climate, we're talking about success as a personal achievement, ignoring structural barriers and collective responsibilities. This narrative fuels a culture of blame and resentment. Those who struggle are seen as failing to compete effectively, which overlooks the systemic issues that contribute to inequality. This mindset is particularly harmful in corporate environments where it fosters unhealthy competition and burnout. In my practice, and as I've said, most of my clientels are boys and men. There are some women, but most of the time, if they present with a work-related problem, I can frequently contextualize that and look at the toxic elements that has led to that person's level of distress or psychological disorder. You know, um, we've gotten rid of the idea that, stress is a diagnosable condition, and I agree with that in some ways. But we cannot ignore the systemic and contextual issues that, create feelings of inadequacy, that allows the person no space to exercise autonomy or agency because it's reduced through things like micromanagement. So we really need to get it into our heads that the system that we're currently operating with, which is fundamentally a patriarchal leadership framework, is toxic. It is hurting people. It is hurting society. It's hurting our communities. So, as I said, in my practice, this is a challenge because I can help that person fundamentally regain some sense of themselves and reduce their level of distress. But I'm not really in that context having any influence over the system where people feel overburdened, unsupported, and trapped in environments that prioritize profit, productivity over the person's well-being. Now, yes, we have, for example, in Australia now, a legislation and it's called psychosocial hazards, and it's incumbent on the organisation and its leadership to manage those. But we're at the very beginning of this. This is not yet matured where we can rely on this. So, what's the alternative? Well, one of the alternatives, the most probably effective alternatives, is distributive leadership. So what am I talking about here? Distributive leadership emphasizes shared responsibility, it emphasizes inclusivity, and it emphasizes collaboration. Those very things that I put into the new masculinity context. So in my book, Making Good Men Great, Surfing the New Masculinity, I outline that in a detailed way. So what we get in that context is an environment that recognizes the strengths and contributions of everybody. It encourages collective decision making and values diverse perspectives. So, in this model, when we apply it, we see an increase in collaboration, cooperation. We see an increase in innovation. Creativity becomes much, much more evident. And we finally see a workforce that has, increased job satisfaction, better morale, and as an organization, I'm going to have fewer absenteeisms, less retributional behavior within the workplace. It also sorts out those people whose confidence exceeds their level of competence because the group will challenge them. They will, you can't fake it all the time. And in an environment that has allowed essentially narcissists and psychopaths to grab a serious foothold in leadership, this has become more and more and more important. We can see that in the political sphere, not just in the United States, but also in other countries like Hungary, where the leaning towards authoritarianism, i.e., that one man is going to solve all our problems, and if we give him power, things will change for the better, has become a significant trend. One that, in my book, is seriously, seriously scary. So, the problem that we got currently is that although distributive leadership is actually a much better model, and by all means, you can check the research, but it really has paid its dividends. But, we have, again, some challenges in terms of moving forward with this because corporations, politicians, leaders in the system at the moment who've been highly rewarded don't necessarily want this to change. Implementing this particular model requires significant cultural shifts and investment in training and development. But we also, most importantly, need to deconstruct the patriarchal ideology that drives this beast of patriarchal leadership, our economy the way that it is. Now, resistance to change is natural. Don't get me wrong, I don't think this is an easy step to take at all. Especially when we've got organisations with long histories of hierarchical leadership. Overcoming this resistance is going to require a level of commitment to cultural change and the development of skills that support collaboration and inclusivity. Now, we keep defaulting to technology to give us the edge. But technology is simply a tool, and in some cases, it's a weapon that is used to reduce the workforce simply to increase profits. And we have seen an enormous shift towards monopolies. Now, that's not an opinion, that's fact. Again, lots of economists are talking about this in the current light. So, what we've got to go and do is take up the challenges, accept that the transition to distributive leadership is worth the effort, despite the hard yards that we're going to have to take. So, we're going to take on the toxicity of patriarchal leadership. And we also are going to build, therefore, more resilient and adaptable organisations. They have longer term sustainability. In my work, I've seen firsthand how embracing distributive leadership can transform workplaces. There's not many, but there's more and more leaders who are stepping up and looking at addressing issues like silos in their organisation and looking at toxic behaviours and how they can be managed by the group, not just top down, but it's top down, bottom up. When employees ultimately feel valued and they have autonomy and work in supportive environments, their psychological well-being improves. They're more engaged. They're not just more productive, they're more creative and innovative. And ultimately, they have a sense of personal success in the context of the organization's success. It becomes a we rather than an I that leads from the front or cracks the whip from the back. We know that making teams self-governing works. A classic example comes out of that in certain health care environments where, because we have a rostered environment, rather than there being a rostering clerk, is they've instituted a system of self-rostering. And guess what? It works a lot better than anything else tried. All right, so at this point, I want everybody to sort of reflect, not just on yourself, but also the sort of organisation that you're in, and finding ways in which you can firstly influence and change your behaviour, and then see about creating a healthier, less toxic work environment. Now, not all of you are going to have that level of influence, but the first thing that we need to do is talk about it. In my view, this transition from patriarchy to being distributive is essential, it's necessary, and most importantly, it's achievable. We can create healthier, more sustainable organisations, political systems, societies, by simply embracing shared responsibility, inclusivity, and cooperation. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining me in this discussion. Thank you for listening to Inspired Change with Gunter. I hope it has inspired you to think differently about leadership and consider the benefits of a distributive approach rather than a hierarchical, territorial one where status and prestige overtakes, competence and the skills to hold people together to focus on a common goal, as well as common remuneration. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and share it with others who might benefit from these insights. I truly believe that together we can inspire change and build a better future. But it's going to take staying on the wave, creating and riding with the groundswell. So stay tuned for our next episode where I'm going to explore some more transformative ideas. So until then, keep inspiring and keep influencing in little ways as much as in maybe bigger ways. Until next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINment.com.